You're listening to Level Up with Melissa Zeloof from ironSource.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Melissa Zeloof, and you're listening to Level Up, a podcast for people who love playing, making, growing, and of course, I said it already, playing mobile games. Today on the show, we have our co-hosts Anton and Kenrick from Play Ventures and guest David Amor, CEO at Playmint, who I desperately want to call David Amor, but I'm not going to, except for that just one time, which I had to allow myself. Thank you so much, everyone, all three of you, for being on the show today.
Good to be here. Thank you.
So,
Hello.
my trusty co-hosts. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about what it's like to be on the actual front lines of the blockchain gaming revolution as a CEO. But before we dive in, David, we always like to start episodes like this, asking guests a little bit about themselves. How did they get into, in this case, blockchain gaming, and why you're so passionate about it? Assuming you're passionate about it.
Be a shame if I wasn't, wouldn't it? My professional game experience goes back a long way. I think the first games that I made were on like Commodore 64 and a Nintendo NES. So that sort of dates things. So I think that was around 1990 when I started. And then my history, bridged history, I suppose, is 10 years at publishers, mostly Electronic Arts, and then 10 years running console companies, mostly one called Relentless, where we made a game, lots of PlayStation games, a series called Buzz, amongst others. And then 10 years running mobile free-to-play companies. So I sold my company to a company called Mag Interactive, based in Stockholm. So I'm part of that for a long time. And then about a year ago, actually a little over now, it was time to do something else. I love building companies, starting from the ground. And somebody who I wanted to set up a company with said, have you considered blockchain games? And I think, like a lot of people, this was January of last year, I think. I liked blockchain, I liked cryptocurrencies, but I didn't really see how they applied to games. He was making a lot of money through selling artwork as NFTs, and it sort of interested me how that technology worked, who the audience was, and I was lucky enough to have somebody that was experiencing that firsthand. And as I spent more time with it, I think that, like a lot of people in the blockchain games world, started to understand how it could be applied to games and what the opportunity was. And so that was, as I say, the beginning of last year, and then we formally set up in the summer of last year. So now we're about 6-7 months in. So there's about 20 of us, but growing, based in Brighton in the UK. That's us.
So tell us a little bit more about Playmint. What's kind of the plan, the long-term vision, and what does the day-to-day of running a blockchain gaming company look like?
I think we're trying to find the sweet spot between a more traditional game that we've made many of in the past and a crypto game. And I think at the moment, those two feel like fairly separate things. There's some really good examples of interesting crypto games. And of course, there's many thousand examples of great, more traditional games. We'd like to build something that's in between the two, but we want to be respectful of what's clearly working in the crypto game world right now. So we deliberately launched ourselves into an area where we could learn, and that's the Lootverse. Loot is an NFT that was released, I think, in August of last year, nothing to do with us. And we love the idea of taking somebody else's NFT and building a game from that. We figured that it was a good way of getting our heads around some areas that we think are going to be important in Web3 games. So interoperability, composability, that kind of stuff, community. I think that we released our first game a couple of weeks ago now that went really well, was really popular, more popular than we expected. And then, for us, it's now working out how we evolve that into a bigger game. Team of about 20 of us here. So I guess we've got two tracks. One is that we continue to evolve this game that we built in the Lootverse, and another one is a 3D dungeon game that we're building. And maybe they meet somewhere in the middle as we go.
And what's the process of sort of getting funding for, let's say, if someone's listening, wants to start their own blockchain gaming company? Is Playmint VC backed? And if so, what was the process like getting funding?
The process that we went through was we started with some angel investment. We got $600,000 of angel investment, which is just enough to get together, enough for a core group of people to quit their day jobs and start focusing on what the company was going to be. That was sort of the start, and that came from friends or people that I know that run games companies, and I think for a lot of those people, it was a way of understanding what the blockchain game world looked like without necessarily doing it for a day job. So that's what got us out the blocks. And then we've recently, in the process of closing our seed round, which gives us more money and puts about a year's worth of track ahead of us, assuming that we don't see any revenue. So I think, put some gas in the tank, not too much. We don't want to raise too much at this point, but enough so that we can focus on hiring good people and making great games rather than worrying that the money's going to run out. I think that's fairly typical. It's a part of the games industry that a lot of people are keen to invest in, either from the games venture capitalists that are saying, hey, I think this crypto games part of the industry is going to be big, or from the crypto side, people that have made money in DeFi and in the finance world saying, I see the way that the place where NFTs are going to next is in games. So you've sort of got two groups of venture capitalists, both interested in investing in crypto games, blockchain games. I suppose day to day for me, I didn't answer that question, is sometimes it's investing, but really my job is sort of business strategy. How often should we release our games? What audience should they be for? What can I do to get things out the way for the people that are actually making and designing the games? Because that's not me. That's not what I'm great at, or at least there are people that are better at that than me in the company. So I sometimes consider my job like the sport of curling. If you'll bear with me a second, I'm the guy at the front trying to get stuff out the way for people. That's sort of how I picture my job, if that helps.
Yes, it does. Very visual. Topical reference also.
There you go, with our Finnish co-hosts, yeah.
Sounds good. Hey, David, you mentioned that you recently launched the first chapter of the Crypt, and a lot of the content was basically cleared very quickly and quicker than your expectations within the team. So could you just give a quick explainer on kind of what this first chapter is about, what the gameplay is, and kind of how this strategy of quick release kind of ties into your strategy of building up these communities from the ground up, and if you feel that, is there basically a playbook in the market that you can follow with this stuff, or are you mostly just sort of learning on the go?
If there is a playbook, I'd love someone to tell me what it is. I don't think that exists yet, which makes it fun. I mean, I like learning new things, and everyone's learning together in blockchain games at the moment. Our production thesis is get things out there quickly. It doesn't need to be enormous, just something out there that reaches an audience that people enjoy. And I think if you can spend too long building a game, you sometimes get sunk cost fallacy, where you feel that the thing you're working on has to work because you spent so much time and energy and money on it. So by putting something out quickly, seeing what people like and dislike about it is something that we try and do. We try and have a sort of cadence of releasing things every couple of months and building on what we've done. Yeah, a description on the Crypt would be that, it's slightly complicated if you don't know the loot NFT. I know you do, Anton, but it's a loot NFT is a series of 8 items as text that can be used in a game. So what we're doing is we're saying we'll take somebody's loot NFT and we introduce them to our dungeon, and depending on the attributes of the loot NFT, we'll take hit points off our dungeon. And I don't think any one person can defeat a dungeon alone, but by collaborating with other people that hold the loot NFT, then they can defeat one of our dungeons. And when that dungeon gets defeated, they share in the spoils by way of our relic NFT. So That's the prize, if you like. And I guess 2 weeks ago, I had a pep talk with the team ahead of the release saying, this is just an experiment. It doesn't matter if everything goes right. We haven't spent a ton of time on this. Don't expect it to work. Don't expect people to show up. We don't know what we're doing here, and we're learning. And the value is of the learning rather than the reaction, if you see what I mean. Of course, I secretly hoped that it would go well, but two things I'm thrilled about. One is that everything worked perfectly, because we're right on the bleeding edge here as far as I'm concerned. As a team, we haven't really done much of this before in terms of blockchain games. But yes, it worked perfectly, and the audience was it was more popular than we expected, to the tune that all dungeons were defeated in 15 minutes. I sort of imagined that the level of interest would be such that those dungeons would remain up for weeks, maybe even months. But the fact that, it felt like an enormous domino rally where we spent 4 months setting up these dominoes and they were all gone within 15 minutes. So it was a fun 15 minutes, and we certainly learned a lot in the process.
Nice. And maybe following up from that, you've obviously seen many different platforms over your career, right? So from consoles to like mobile, now more on the blockchain gaming side. I think one of the interesting things to me is kind of how do you bring this to your audience and the marketing of that. So in consoles, it was maybe more to distributors, to wholesale parties, or like there was a very different kind of way of distributing your games versus free to play, which was then direct to consumer, CPI over CPA models. How do you see that developing in the blockchain gaming world?
I don't know. I think that's one of the big questions at the moment. I've learned that, I've always been a production guy first and foremost. Well, mostly production guy. And I now understand the role that marketing always plays in games. And it's not completely clear what that looks like in blockchain. So it's very important. We deliberately, one of the reasons we liked working with Loot was because there was a group of people that were already talking about it. There was an audience there that we could address. There's a Loot Town Square that we can speak at. There's Twitter feeds that we can be part of. So we sort of growth hacked our way by working in a community of people that already love what we were about to do. So
maybe put it in this way. Do you see a big difference in kind of your early cohorts, golden cohorts of like your free-to-play mobile games versus now the Loot people who are playing the game? Do you see a distinct difference there? Or?
Yeah, I suppose. First of all, I would say it's a very narrow audience, people that own Loot. I think what seems to be the case is engaging audiences over Discord, and giving people a reason to get excited, sharing the white paper ahead of time, engaging with the people that are playing or will be playing your game. Those all seem to be important attributes in raising awareness and getting an audience for your game. And I think that as time goes on, we'll be introducing a token and incentivizing behavior that we like from our players is, I think, a good way to get those people evangelizing and spreading the word. I do think, is it like a golden cohort? I suppose so. Because it was over so quickly, then not many people got to play the game, truthfully. So I think something for us is what happens when we go beyond the people that are absolutely fanatical about the Lootverse and to a wider set of people that have more of a passing interest. So I suppose in a way it is like a golden cohort. I haven't done much maths on it, but I imagine that most of the people playing were spending somewhere between $500 and $1,000 on gas fees to play. So that tells you something about what kind of player that is, I suppose.
If we shift a bit and kind of look at zoom out and look at the overall sort of tech perspective now, especially from a game studio's point of view, how would you say, or where do you think the industry is at currently when it comes to kind of adjacent tech that is needed to scale up a business here? Because if we look at free to play right now, you have the game engines which are being used now. You have the ad networks, all kind of services around marketing attribution and everything that can be put in place, kind of a plug and play model for many of the free to play studios out there. So So how do you think that this, or what's your kind of take on what this looks like now for a blockchain game studio?
Yeah, okay. It's let's be kind and call it embryonic, shall we? I mean, it's early, and I won't say painfully early because I think that if I consider when I was working free to play most recently, then so much of that stuff was already established. So you knew what ad networks you want to use and what sort of CPM you should expect and how you optimize your creatives, and all of these things were known. And there's less opportunity at that point. It's easy to find out how the best practice of building a mobile game and how you monetize it, how you retain, and that isn't there yet. And the technology isn't there yet. And even the distribution platforms in blockchain game isn't really there yet. So it's a ton of new things that aren't particularly mature yet. But I think that leads to opportunities, and it's interesting. I suppose you could look at, I think of it from two sides, really. There's the client side, which is, okay, it's probably difficult to build on iOS and Google Play natively because those distribution systems haven't made their position particularly clear. It's risky doing native mobile games. Steam is PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo. None of those app stores are clear about what you can and can't do really in blockchain games. So there's a challenge. That probably means you're doing something in browser. And if you're doing something in browser, then that client technology isn't as mature as it is in making native games. So Unity is obviously our go-to, or not obviously, but has been our go-to for many years. And they do have a browser component, but it's not as mature as native. So, and particularly on mobile web, that's even less mature. So there's some challenges there. And then on the Web3 side, then you've got the chains themselves, which a lot of them aren't mature insofar as they don't have a lot of people developing with them or players using them. So a lot of when you see blockchains listing a set of features that they are there, but they're just not particularly proven yet. And then there's a suite of technology. We sort of use technology from consensus. So to get into the weeds a bit, Infura, Truffle, we sometimes use Hard Hat. So it's a set of technologies there, but I think they're probably built for DeFi rather than being built for games. And of course, people are working on that, but it's a lot of these things are beta, let's say.
It's kind of like chicken and egg. It's like, do you need the tech to help you do something, or do you need the thing first and then supporting tech sort of springs up around it?
Well, I think all these tools and technology providers see the games industry coming because, as Anton and Kenrick know, there's a lot of investment coming that will create a lot of games, and they're all going to need this technology. So I think it's coming, but it's just early.
Speaking of DeFi, we've seen a lot of kind of vampire attacks in DeFi, right? Where when one contract gets cloned, like famous example, of course, Uniswap and Sushi. How do you see this in games? Are you more keen to build for like an interoperability world, or are you more keen to keep a bit of closed source and closer to your chest kind of development? Because it's obviously a very big departure from traditional free-to-play games, right? In which you have closed-loop economies.
Yeah, I'll answer that by way of a short anecdote that I was recalling to the team the other day. In 2013, I was running a console studio making PlayStation quiz game, and it was like an amazing quiz game. We'd sold 10 million copies, really, a big PlayStation game. And I remember there was a game called 4 Picks, 1 Word, which was a relatively early mobile game. Do you remember that one? Doesn't matter. Look it up. It's a fantastic game. I thought, watch this. The game makers are coming now. Stand aside 4 Picks, 1 Word. Sure, you've had your moment in the sun, but the real game makers are coming, and these players, they just don't understand what a good game looks like. So what I completely misunderstood was how the people that were playing mobile games were not after the kind of experiences that I was in the habit of making for PlayStation. And in fact, nothing much was the same. The ways of monetizing were different, the session time, the game mechanics, marketing, analytics, segmentation, all of these things that proved to be really important in mobile weren't really a thing at that time in console. And I got a feeling that something similar is going to happen here with crypto games, let's call them, where there's a set of things that we won't have seen to date that will end up being really important in blockchain games. And I think it's difficult to say exactly what they'll be. I've got a feeling that interoperability and composability will be a couple, which is why we've doing things that are interoperable insofar as we're taking a loot NFT and indeed the NFTs that come out of our game are being built into other loot experiences. And I think that's going to be an important part of games, blockchain games. But I don't think we got to a point yet where I can list all the important aspects of what a blockchain game will be. I think that will be clearer next year and clearer still the year after. What do you think?
I personally think, the open source interoperability, that's what we've seen already, right? That allows people to take each other's inventions and just continue to iterate and make things better. So I'm all for the open source approach here. The fight is going to be at the user stage, right? Like where and how do you bind the users to your game, your protocol, your coin, whatever that may be. But then the product itself can just leverage all of the other stuff that has been built in the ecosystem. I think we've seen that, and then it's down to the team and the values of retaining your users, basically.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things that I've been thinking about. One thing about interoperability is the fact that you're able to bring in an audience from another game into yours by taking their NFT. So an example might be Land in Axie, where because of this permissionless way that NFTs work, another company can say, we honor your Axie land here, and you can use that in our game. Now, they're not doing that necessarily to be nice. I think they're doing it so that they appeal to people that are playing Axies, and an Axie player doesn't have to go from a cold start. One of the things I found in games is it's very hard if you've built up a lot of value as a player in a game to then encourage somebody to start playing something brand new is difficult because of the amount of time and energy they've invested in it. So by having some interoperability between games means that, sure, the work that you've been putting in this game now can be used in the game that we're introducing. So I think that will be an important aspect in blockchain games. It's my guess today.
I think my guess there is as well that kind of the interoperability part is not so much about that you would want to include other people's assets in your games just for the sake of it, or because it would be more fun. I don't think it, and plus with all the work that is needed by creating new 3D models from the ground up and balancing them from your own game, it's probably not sort of the main point. I think it's something that sort of a lot of the crypto people like to bring up as an idea who necessarily don't have a background in game dev or working with games, that kind of underestimate the difficulty of doing that at scale. But I think, as you mentioned, David, it could be interesting from a user acquisition point of view by showing that, hey, you might be able to bring something that you have invested and own in this game, but as a developer, you likely still want to upsell a lot of the stuff in your own game as well for the people. But as sort of there's going to be more intelligence and more tools built around wallet activity, for example, what Nansen is doing on you being able to track kind of what people purchase, you will be able to find, for example, the wallets that want to spend on dungeon crawling games. And then those are the wallets you want to be targeting with looking at kind of what NFTs they own, and then propose that, hey, you can bring something that you own into our game as well. And then it's your job as a developer to basically retain those within your own ecosystem. And then you start sort of upselling your own assets, making them further ingrained into that game.
And another way I agree with your production headache of trying to support a very eclectic set of NFTs. I don't think it's going to be quite that literal. Something to consider is that going back to that loot NFT, the loot NFT can be used in a dozen games right now, or at least a dozen experiences of one kind or another. And one of the reasons that works is because the NFT itself is quite simple. It doesn't, it isn't a sword that needs to be rendered in a certain way. It's a very simple list of items. And because you've started with that list, rather than it started in somebody else's game, you have to pull it out somehow and put it into yours. No, you started with the primitive of this NFT that then gets built out. So I think if you start in a different place, then that interoperability becomes easier because you all got the same starting point, rather than trying to pull something in for somebody else's game, which is maybe different.
Yeah, and then sort of one quick note there as well. I think people maybe tend to forget that you can sort of decouple the actual NFT from the 2D asset that it is showing, if there's a JPEG, for example. And we could think that let's list the landowners in Axie, and then those NFTs could be in your game. They could just be early access passes to the alpha version of the gameplay and have nothing to do with land in that game.
Yes, that's right. I mean, it could just, I think creatively it's less interesting, but you could just say, hey, I'm going to honor your NFT by way of a starter pack for my game. It's not trying to rebuild the sword in a brand new game. It's just saying, hey, if you've got cool stuff, we're going to give you a head start in this game.
Exactly. If we spend just a few moments on talking also about kind of blockchain versus traditional gaming, given that you've had a career in traditional gaming and now moving into this new space, you mentioned already a couple of sort of technical challenges that you've seen as a company, and the stuff that you kind of need to learn or relearn things and learn new things from the ground up. Any other ways you've noticed, maybe from a team building perspective, or kind of keeping the team in check for the roadmap in terms of kind of leading game companies in this new space versus in the old space?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of opinion in blockchain games at the moment. A lot of people join the games industry because of a love of a certain kind of game, and when that type of game doesn't match the game that you're building doesn't match the game that you love, join the industry for. I'm not explaining that well, but you know what I mean. So I noticed the same thing in mobile games that I knew a lot of people that loved making PlayStation games because they love playing PlayStation games, and now you have to persuade those people, look, we should be building mobile games. Same thing, there's a lot of lack of education about what we can do with Web3 and blockchain games. So I guess that's something. Finding people that really understand the opportunity of blockchain games takes a bit of understanding. Truthfully, it hasn't been a particularly big problem for us. We've been able to find a great set of people that understand the opportunity and are really loving what they're doing here. So I suppose that's a consideration. Another one is that we think a lot about is audience, because at the moment, the way I describe it, I suppose the core gamers currently look at this with disdain. The introduction of NFTs into something they love, and then I suppose casual players, people that might be playing Candy Crush, are probably apathetic about this. Don't really see what it adds or don't even know about it, I guess. So we've chosen to target people that already understand the space and love these kind of games, which means that there's an audience that can't wait to see what we build, but it is a smaller audience than we're used to. And there's a bit of figuring out exactly who that audience is and what kind of game we should build for them. So we talk a lot about that. How much of a traditional game should it be versus something that's more DeFi or GameFi is something we talk about. But ultimately we're games makers, so what we build will ultimately look and feel similar to a video game that you've played before, or hopefully taking our learnings from these earlier experiments, which are, let's call them more esoteric, I suppose, in terms of a game.
So we speak to a lot of founders, right, who are looking to build in Web3 or crypto gaming, and most of them are about half my age, if not more. They definitely were not around in the console days. Are there any kind of universal truths or like learnings you would suggest to them? We basically see like very crypto native 20-year-olds come to market with a gaming idea, mostly with a white paper and just an idea for that game. Any special words of advice for them?
Well, I pause a little bit because people that are crypto native coming to the game space understand a set of things that I don't. So I don't want to assume that I have all the answers for people starting to make games here. I would say that what I found over time is it's probably better to do a game that's smaller in scope, that's more polished, than a game that you never quite finish or is rough around the edges. And I'm not saying create something that's a tiny experience that's over as soon as it's begun, but too often I see people's ambition in terms of size of game be something that they can't execute well. It's difficult to make a game, and the more people you have building a game, sort of the more complicated it becomes. So I like to do a small thing well. That's worked for me. Another thing that I found to be true is that it's always about the execution, not about the idea. I used to have the opinion that my ideas were amazing because Sony would pay me lots of money to make them, so I must have amazing ideas. But it turns out it's not really the ideas. Ideas are 10 a penny. It's how well you execute them that really ends up being important. So, I think that's an important thing to consider, which means that the people around you who are actually building it have to be the best at what they do, because the idea won't take you to the finish line.
Nice.
And I guess another thing is that, again, just talking about mistakes I've made in the past, I suppose, is that the audience is always way bigger. Well, let's say the audience that will play a game is way bigger than you would think. I remember when we had a front cover of trendy magazines with Lara Croft, I was thinking, oh, wow, we're mass market. Or you sell 100 million Wii's and OAPs are playing games. Oh, now the world is playing games. And each time, like year on year, it's expanded beyond what I thought was possible. What are we now? 3 billion people playing games? But I would bet that we're not at the top yet. So the challenge is, well, what's stopping the remaining, I don't know how many people in the world, 4 billion people playing those games? And then if you can figure out what is it, why is there not a game that they've played to date? Because I think if you can create the right experience, then you will find a new audience that's out there still. So I think about that, and I guess maybe we're seeing it in some play and earn games at the moment, that we're seeing people start to play games for the first time because they're motivated by the idea that they might make some money in it. Maybe that's ends up being important in blockchain games to reach a bigger audience.
If I say you're venerable, is that an insult or a compliment?
If I'm vulnerable, you mean?
No, venerable. Advice.
Oh, yeah. I see.
Venerable David Amor.
Oh, I don't know. It's a double-edged coin, that one, isn't it?
Last
Sure,
question.
Yeah.
What are some of the blockchain gaming projects and startups we should be looking out for in 2022? Obviously, Playmint excluded. Well, no, actually, you can shameless plug here. Sorry. You can start with Playmint and then tell us about some others if you have.
I won't do that. But the thing that I find challenging in this space is a lot of the games, including games that have actually sold a lot of NFTs, when you reach out and touch them, they're not really there. There's lots of games where I go, wow, lots of people getting excited about this game. But then when you look at it, there's no gameplay or being presented yet. And that's not to say they won't ever, but I'm a little bit suspicious of games that talk a lot about how amazing the game is going to be without showing anything of it, because I guess going back to my point that it's about execution, not about the idea itself. We're talking a bit about Thetan Arena lately. I think I admire that as a game that is somehow native on iOS and Google Play, and has NFT elements and is high production values and seems popular. I think that a game that's impressed us. I guess Star Atlas, so maybe put that, could be amazing. A lot of fanfare for something. We'll see what that turns into. Maybe, but that could be the Star Atlas of the blockchain games world. I'm not sure yet, but I don't know. Anton, Kenrick, you have your finger on the pulse of all these things. Any that you're playing or looking out for?
I made them answer this a couple of episodes ago.
Oh, really? You can repeat
They
the
can
question.
do it again. Do it again.
If you ask us, we're just going to shill our own portfolio, right? So.
It's a fast-moving industry. Who knows? What we said last week could be very different today.
It's all about meta soccer. But as you said, it's not about the gameplay. It's about the experience. It's about the lead up to the gameplay. It's about beautiful concept art. Eventually, we'll get to an actual game. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, shall we?
Well, and that's
overarchingly, I think we're very excited to see sort of game developer talent going into the space and really start seeing tangible products and games hitting the market outside of, or sort of beyond the fluff of NFT drops and token sales, and actually see end user products in the market. And that's especially teams like David, who actually bring experience from game development and are really holistically thinking about how to make a product for a real audience here is something that we're on the lookout for this year.
And the way that I look at that, so I know a lot of gaming CEOs, people that run gaming companies, that start companies and run gaming companies. I think 2021 was the first year that people said, okay, this is viable now. This is going to be everybody's in the games industry, at least the CEOs I knew, say, okay, yeah, I can see this being an important new part of the games industry. But often they are running a games company already. So even if they thought the best thing for them to do would be to jump into this area and start a new games company, they have to honor what they set up, or they can't just leap out the games company they're currently running. So I think I was lucky insofar as I was building a company just as it became clear that this is a new part of the games industry. I think we'll see other games CEOs move from traditional games, let's call them, or casual games, into the blockchain space this year and next. I'm sure, Anton, Kenrick, you're speaking to those kind of people as a VC.
Absolutely.
This has been super, super interesting. Thank you, David. And of course, thank you to my wonderful co-hosts, Anton and Kenrick. I think we've covered a lot of ground. I actually have you guys have given me an idea for another episode. So people who are listening, keep tuning in for the endlessly evolving story of blockchain gaming. And yeah, thank you guys for a great episode.